Hello, I want to share two methods for recovering our authenticity. These are from my own experience. I suppose other people have found them as well, but I haven't heard anyone describe either one, so I'm sharing them here. What do I mean by authenticity and how might we have lost it? I watched this Gabor Maté video recently. The link is in the description. And I like the clarity with which he explains how and why many of us have lost our authenticity. It's 4 minutes long. If you haven't seen it, I suggest watching it now. It's titled Authenticity versus Attachment. So if you too, like happened to me in early childhood, you got so afraid of your caretaker's reactions that you sacrificed your authenticity, here's the third technique I use to get it back. When I'm in a situation where I realize I'm getting overwhelmed by anxiety or emotional pain, where things seem to be going too fast all around for me to be able to keep up, it helps to think it's not me who's overwhelmed and in distress, it's my inner child. I don't know who exactly came up with the notion of an inner child. I think of it as a part of ourselves who is who we were back in childhood. When I imagine it's this child inside who is getting overwhelmed rather than me, this shift brings a little relief. It creates a little space where I can relax. It slows things down and gives me a little time to catch my breath and notice what is going on. Because it's not me in danger anymore. And then I can turn my attention to this child and see his suffering or his fear, and that brings up compassion in me for this child, which this child needs very much, given that the difficulty of what it was like back then was never really acknowledged by anyone. When you look back, do you see how it's totally understandable for the young child you were to feel so afraid and so lost given what was going on? Maybe you're like me and it's been really hard to feel compassion for yourself. I think that's also totally understandable. I mean, I see how useful it's been to think of myself as not deserving compassion because it kept me out of trouble. If I had not suppressed my authenticity, like Gabor Maté explains, if I had asked for compassion by showing in any way that I was in pain or that I was afraid, it's likely it would have been too much to handle for my parents, who were themselves pushing down their own vulnerability since their childhood. So it makes sense it's difficult to have compassion for myself today. And that's how this little technique is useful. It gets around this block to self-compassion. It's so much more doable to have compassion for this little helpless child than for myself. And this lets him at last be seen and have his feelings and needs validated. He can finally hear things like, "What's happening today? It's like how it was when you were 5, right? You're alone in your bed at night, it's dark and you're afraid, and nobody is there to reassure you that you're safe. You're very lonely and feeling miserable because you fear that if you call, all that's going to happen is that you'll get told off. So you feel lonely and hopeless on top of getting afraid? It's like no one cares and you don't matter to anyone. And it's so scary and so overwhelming to think that it's going to be like that forever. Nobody will ever come to save you from this terrible suffering because you're just not worth being loved." When I speak to him like this, my inner child receives this compassion. He does feel like he matters to someone, and this helps extinguish this pain that's been there all this time, that nobody has soothed enough yet. Now, the second technique for recovering our authenticity little by little. I use this when somebody is asking me for something or I want to ask for something, and I find it difficult because I tend to put other people's needs in front of mine. Again, because it was safer in childhood to do that rather than stand up for myself. for the exact same reason as I was saying before, that when I did stand up for what I wanted, my parents couldn't handle it and got angry, and that scared the hell out of me. So what I do in those situations is I imagine that my inner child is here with me, and it's his wants and needs that I'm trying to uphold rather than my own. And then I see myself in sort of a mediator role. There's my inner child on this side, and there's the other person on that side, and my job is to be fair so that both people receive in a fair manner. So instead of ending up gauging how much I can do without, how much I can afford not to receive in this particular deal in order to stay safe, the situation changes into a new one where my challenge is much less scary, because it's no longer about taking risks like when I was a child, when asking for something meant risking getting punished, getting rejected, getting abandoned, losing the attachment my survival depended on. Even if my inner child, it's really me, it's much easier for me to ask for something on his behalf, so he's treated with exactly as much consideration as the other person in deciding who gets what. And when I do this, again, as with the other technique, it helps validate my inner child so that in the future it becomes easier and easier to see myself as someone who is worth just as much as any other person. So those are two ways of recovering our authenticity through self-compassion: extinguishing old fears and old pain, and changing our working model of ourselves to an image more in line with today's reality, as John Bowlby explains. I want to talk about Bowlby, the pioneer of attachment science, along with his colleagues such as Mary Ainsworth, in future videos. But for now, I hope you find these two techniques useful in your life. Take care.